Yeah.
So many mentors have been able to share principles. It's okay to be melancholy sometimes, and
hmm
it's okay to be joyful and childlike and to want wonder.
Welcome to People Watching, a podcast where we figure out what it looks like to become a role model we've always wanted by talking with real people who have found real role models in their own lives. I'm Megan Robinson. Every week, I sit down with a guest where we cut through all the noise and identify better sources of hope, creativity, and wisdom as we learn to make decisions about the kind of life we want to live. So join us. Let's do some people watching. My guest today is Austin Church. Austin is an entrepreneur, marketing consultant, and leader of a private community for advanced freelancers focusing on B2C growth. He's also the author of Free Money, 9 Counterintuitive Moves for Life-Changing Income. I've followed Austin's work for several years now, and I have always appreciated his down-to-earth, practical approach to freelancing and consulting. I've also taken his course, Morning Marketing Habit, which is a great resource for freelancers trying to figure out how to make marketing simple, routine, and unscary. Austin and his wife live in Tennessee with their 3 children. He is a self-described, multi-passionate reader, writer, traveler, runner, and fly fisherman. And he's also a whiskey and barbecue enthusiast, which you have to be in the South. I wanted to talk to Austin because, as he puts it, he had planned to be an English professor, and then he found himself to be a serial entrepreneur and a freelance coach. I was curious how he found himself in that tension of being highly creative while also running a business, which is not something that most creative folks want or learn how to do. Our conversation explored Austin's journey as a writer and entrepreneur, what it felt like to grow up in a loving faith community and how that shaped him, and the many mentors he's had and continues to have in his life. We also talked about the importance of rightly ordered priorities and what it looks like to live in a dynamic tension of constantly discerning what those priorities are and holding them in daily life. Make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. We're in the studio. Welcome, Austin.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
Thank you. As we get started today, I love to share with my guests and with our listeners some touchstones for the conversation. These just help us with our expectations for each other. These help our listeners know what to expect. And it just guides our conversation and making sure that we're showing up fully. So, Austin, would you love to start us off and just read to the line?
Whatever we share is by invitation, not obligation. If either of us is not comfortable pursuing a topic, let's just say, I'd prefer not to share. Thank you.
Will do. Silence is also a partner in our conversation. Feel free to take a moment to reflect without immediately filling the space with words. Leave room for the inner teacher to whisper as well.
Be present as fully as possible. This is a space to acknowledge our doubts, fears, and failings as much as it is a space to share our joys, convictions, and successes.
And let's ask open, honest questions. If we're not sure what the other meant in the question or statement, ask. Gives us a chance to clarify or rephrase. And ask questions that we genuinely don't know the answer to. Surprise is a great catalyst of insight. Awesome. As we get started, one of the things that I always love to start poking around in is I would love to hear a little bit about your life journey so far But really, I would love to hear about the things that stand out for you as most meaningful and that have helped formed you to who you are today.
Okay, so we have 17 hours to talk about that, right? Maybe that's a good place to start. I love to laugh. I've always been prone to make people laugh. That was part preference and part learned behavior. I look back at who I was as a kid, and humor was definitely a smokescreen for pain.
Mhm.
And I don't say pain to give anybody the wrong idea about my childhood. I had this golden childhood, but I was a kid with big emotions that I did not fully understand, hypersensitivity that, of course, I did not understand, high empathy. And so I did not know how to process a lot of what was going on in me. And so I learned how to make people laugh, because if they're laughing, they don't pay too close of attention. So that's not to say that humor is always like this diversion. I just love to laugh sometimes because it's you laugh or you cry. That's also a big part of who I am, in many ways, a part of who I am that has shaped me. Even now, when I'm watching like a Pixar movie with my wife and our 3 kids, at the moments of redemption, reconciliation, and restoration, they know that clockwork, Dad is going to get choked up. And so they will all turn and look at me. And I don't know if anyone listening or you, Megan, would remember this moment from Seinfeld where Kramer starts blubbering and then he says, "Don't look at me, I'm hideous." Every time I get choked up at the most predictable spots in the plot in these Pixar movies that are formulaic, and yet I will gobble it up every single time, everyone turns and looks at me. But my dad has always been that way, and his dad was that way. And so it's funny, I come from a long line of male criers, proud or embarrassed male criers. And like I said, that kind of shaped who I was as a kid. I think I became a writer in part because I did not know how to process pain and intense emotion. I had enough self-awareness or social savvy, you might say, to realize I probably shouldn't go about broadcasting this.
Yeah.
And so I was writing poetry on the sly to process what was going on and was not sharing it with anyone. I got outed accidentally. I accidentally outed myself in the 8th grade when all of the 8th grade students at school had to submit a piece of writing to the 8th grade writing anthology. And I didn't think much about it. It was ill-considered at the time, but I decided to submit a poem I had written called Reflections, and it was written about a specific kid and how I knew I had hurt him with sarcasm. And I wish I could take my words back, because words have the power to destroy and harm, even cripple, long past when physical violence would have gone away, right? The teacher decides to make Reflections, which was the name of my poem, the name of the writing anthology.
Oh, wow.
And I think she thought this was like a big honor.
Yeah. For an 8th grader.
But for an 8th grader, and I was like, oh, I have severely miscalculated here. She printed my poem as the cover of the anthology. It wasn't on the inside. And again, remember, I'm the class clown. This writing anthology, a printed copy, goes home with every single one of my classmates who have submitted, hey, our trip to Disney World and a book report, and not minimizing any of that, but it was not this sort of navel-gazing, pained exploration of precocious sarcasm. So from that point forward, a lot of my friends and friends' parents looked at me side-eyed to be like, you're not going to start like weeping in my kitchen, are you? But that was always just a big part of my story, being a sensitive young man and then not really seeing where sensitive men fit in. But because I was funny and because I was smart, I just learned to tuck that away. And this is the last little anecdote I'll share on this. I was doing this spiritual formation and leadership development program. It was about 10 months long, my second year of grad school. And the guy who led the program called me down in front of the whole group one time. And it was because I was goofing off. I was joking. And he knew that he had not done it well. And so he asked to meet with me, and then he apologized. He apologized in front of the group. Then he asked to meet with me one-on-one, and he apologized again. But he said, I want you to reconsider how you show up in group settings. Your default is to make jokes. He said, but you have a lot more to offer than that. And so if you bookend 8th grade, so I was about 14 with second year of grad school. So I was 26.
Okay.
About 12 years of not acting out, that's the wrong way to say, occupying the same niche in social settings. But I think that was a breakthrough for me. And in many ways, that sort of vacillation between like all that I'm noticing and experiencing in myself and the world, especially things that are bigger than I am and outside of my control. And what do you do with that if you're a sensitive, empathetic person? And then humor and how you show up in group settings as a way of coping and as a form of armor. So there's a really long answer to a very short question.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. This is, by any chance, are you familiar with the Enneagram?
I'm a 1 with a wing 2.
Okay. Interesting.
Not a 3.
Not a 3? Okay.
What would you have pegged me? And we both know it's bad manners to peg people, but I give you permission to peg me.
Yeah. I just
wondered, what would you have said?
I would have wondered a 4. Yeah. I am a 4, which of course we're all like, all the 4s are like, Colleen, you too?
Yes.
But no,
Do you know what ones say to each other?
What's that?
Do you know what ones say to each other when we meet each other? I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, by the way.
That's great. That's great. So I think I go to a 1 in stress. So I definitely get like the unhealthy, like when the wonderful things about 1s start tipping into the extreme version that makes you want to go, I'm sorry. So I do understand that. And sometimes I have to like slap myself upside the head and be like, you're stressing over a detail that really doesn't matter. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I definitely resonate with what you were saying as a young, especially as a child. Everything is new. You've never encountered a situation before. And especially as a highly sensitive person as well. I wrote poetry my whole childhood. If you'd asked me what I wanted to be, it was a starving poet in an attic somewhere. That was my grand ambition. That's it. Yeah. And actually, this is a great kind of segue into something I was really curious about, because what you were just describing, and also in some of when you sent in some information before our conversation, you had said you were looking at being an English professor. And now you're working as marketing consultant, freelance coach, serial entrepreneur. And I'm just very curious how that's how life goes. You go in directions that you don't expect, plans that you make, and suddenly you're like, that's not the path I thought I was. So I'm just interested in what stands out to you as shifting that or adding those to that core word, the word.
So you were so diplomatic to say that you're curious about instead of confused by, right? I'm like, so I did go to grad school for creative writing with a focus in poetry. If I go back and look at what I loved to do as a kid, it's funny now I look at how I spend my time and it's actually very similar. So those things that I love to explain how a poet ends up becoming a business person, specifically an entrepreneur. I was always fiercely protective of my time. And I didn't realize that. In fact, it was last year I went to breakfast with my best friend. We met when we were 4. And he just said, when his family moved into the neighborhood, so that's almost 37 years ago, right? So that's a lot of life. We've done almost 4 decades together now. And he said offhandedly, oh yeah, you've always been really protective of your time. And he said it like, duh. But I thought, he knew me when I was 4, and he could tell all these little stories. So back then I was really protective of my time. That has shaped my career path, or the twists and turns of my professional evolution, or whatever you want to call it. So I got my degree, I graduated. No one was hiring poets. Shocker.
Wow.
Big shocker. So I did the responsible thing and just traveled for 6 weeks and spent the rest of my money. I loved to fly fish. And again, as a kid, I loved exploration and I loved the pursuit of something. I liked accomplishments. I liked knowing when I had succeeded. Oh, I caught the thing. So again, you fast forward, being an entrepreneur, I love the pursuit of something. And I think as a writer, I love the pursuit of something too. So fiercely protective of my time. You could throw independent in there. The love of pursuit and exploration, right? So I get a job out of grad school at a marketing agency because it turns out marketing agencies sometimes hire writers. It's cute to me looking back that I walked in to talk to the principal at the agency with a printed portfolio in hand, and my writing samples consisted mostly of like poetry and a bit of fiction and a bit of creative nonfiction and like maybe 1 or 2 things that could have been considered copywriting, but stuff I'd done pro bono. Anyway, I loved it. I loved marketing. Specifically, I loved branding. And because I was the youngest person at the agency, and no joke, the only one who even had a Facebook account, I became the de facto social media strategist. And I'm like, what's that? You can't put me in a meeting and call me your social media strategist. And they were like, yes, we can. Whatever. But I loved it. I started reading books about branding and a lot of it just clicked. And I've always loved a creative or intellectual problem to solve. I loved problem solving. And again, so when I look back at what did I love as a kid, I loved figuring things out. My mom we still laugh about how I took this old hamster cage and said that I was going to trap a bird. So I tied a little string on the end, I put a little bowl of water and some bread inside and propped up the like sliding door with a little stick. And then I like hoisted it up into the green ash tree in our front yard. And my mom, and I'm not knocking my mom, but she, being who she is, was preparing me for disappointment before anything had happened. So she's like, you can't be disappointed if you don't catch anything. Yeah. And I will never forget, I get off the school bus, which just stopped right in front of our house. And I ran over to the tree and there was the most beautiful bluebird you can imagine inside the hamster cage. And so I untie it and I carefully lower it. And then I just walk with the hamster cage into the house. And I'm like, look, Mom. And she just said, I can't believe it. And I ended up writing a poem about that in grad school, right? So it's like, what is poetry if not a creative and intellectual problem to solve? What is building a brand if not solving a creative and intellectual problem? I think about like small domains that kids have. And then I think about how they just expand and become bigger domains for adults. But I'm not sure that our domains really change that much. Parker Palmer has this incredible book called Let Your Life Speak, where he talks a little bit about that. Read your life backward so that you can see some of the themes, maybe even some of the like prototypical domains. And mine haven't changed a whole lot. So I'll speed up. I started freelancing after I got laid off, which actually suited my desire for independence, autonomy, flexibility just fine. I've always loved to travel. And so I figured out that if you have clients who want you to visit on site, they will pay you to travel. Imagine that. One thing led to another, and I developed mobile apps for a while. Sold that portfolio, parlayed just a little bit of expertise in managing software engineers and programmers into co-founding and investing in a tech startup. That failed, but it was interesting because I developed all this sort of in the trenches expertise around go-to-market strategy, fundraising, the specific type of storytelling that is pitching investors on investing in your company, which is really betting on you as a leader. So when we decided to wind up the startup, it was natural to begin consulting because I had, on the one hand, I hadn't outgrown freelance writing because I still did it. But on the other hand, it felt confining to only call myself a freelance writer when I had already done all of these other things.
Sure.
So then I co-founded a brand development and marketing studio with a friend. And most recently, I've done more business coaching, specifically for more advanced freelance creatives and consultants. So people like me who typically enter the business world through the door of problem solving or creativity, and may be very good technicians in the sense that they're great at reading a balance sheet, or they're great at writing copy, or they're great at building websites. But like me, that doesn't mean necessarily that they know how to price creativity.
Sure.
They haven't necessarily studied brand development the way I have to understand differentiation and positioning the way I do. Again, I see these through lines, these like golden threads tracing back through my life, and it hasn't changed a whole lot. And before you hit the record button, we were joking about, oh, maybe I'm on the right track if I spend my time doing stuff I would do for free.
Yeah.
I'm there now in the sense that I lead a private paid community called Freelance Cake for freelancers. I do business coaching for advanced freelancers. And then I do a fair amount of speaking, and then I write nearly every day. So it's just, in a way, I feel like I've come full circle back to telling stories, making people laugh to help the medicine go down. And in this case, the medicine is business advice. And so that's the winding path that I have followed. I should add that I like money, not for its own sake, but because I realized even when I was a kid, if I have money, I can buy candy and fishing lures, the things that I like. And these were the things that I liked. Fishing tackle.
Yeah.
There are these sycamore trees that have that like really smooth silvery bark, and they grow like tall, and I could not climb them as a kid, but they were over the Little Harpeth River, and I would always lose my fishing lures in these sycamores. And so I was constantly in need of more money, constantly burning through my allowance, not because I was like prodigal or wasteful, but because I spent so much time fishing.
Yeah.
I always had a money-making scheme.
Okay.
Always.
Okay.
Always. I sold the lunch that my mom made me every day to the same kid whose mom, unfortunately, did not make his lunch. And then I just bought lunch in the cafeteria, and I netted $2.50 every day.
Did you make a profit off of that?
Every day. I had a 50% profit margin, Megan. And so that's what kept me in Fund Up and Rooster Tail Spinners. And another one, this one is even worse. I know you love to read, but this one's even worse. I figured out from the librarian when new shipments of books arrived in the library. And I was a pretty good curator. I read so much that I knew enough to say, this is a good book, this isn't a good book. So I could fairly quickly pick out the best of the new books.
Mm-hmm.
I would rent them, or I would check them all out. And then the library had a loophole so that you could do 2 weeks, not just one.
Okay.
And my classmates would have to pay me to get the new books. And I'm like, that is ridiculous. It's free. Why are you charging people money for something you got for free? But I'm like, I want Fund Up and Pez and fishing lures.
Yeah.
That was the sort of counterpart the whole time is if there are things that you love, not just objects, but experiences that cost money, then if you can figure out how to make money while maintaining freedom, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. One of my friends who will also be on the podcast, she's a phenomenal artist and a science illustrator. And she has always worked either gig jobs or working as an artist, a tattoo artist, all of this stuff. And I told her one time, I've just always been impressed with how she's done that. And she said much the same thing in that time is the one thing I cannot get back. And I'm not willing to give that to somebody else. Fair. I have always been attracted to entrepreneur or consulting or whatever, because like you, I've always been very independent. And there's just this sense, someone's telling me to do something, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that okay is my brain is already leaving this conversation. Like my mind is already backing out of this conversation. I see you trying to put a commitment on me, trying to sneak into my calendar.
Yeah.
And I can sit there and say, okay, but my mind is doing this.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things when I had worked in traditional offices. So when I was very small, very young, I don't even know. Was I even 10 years old? I don't know. I made 3 vows to myself. I would never be a secretary. I would never marry a man in the ministry. And I would never...
These are so specific.
They are so... This friend is saying, where did these come from this young? And I would never marry a man in the military. Oh, I have been an admin, a secretary, multiple times over. I went to seminary. I have worked in ministry and theological education. I just think it hasn't happened. I just think God in his infinite humor and wisdom is going to have me marry a military chaplain. I swear. But
you got to be careful the things that you vow, right? Because to your point, I believe God always speaks to us in our own language, and that literally and metaphorically. Yeah. Because I love humor, God loves to be a little bit facetious with me. In fact, that's one of the ways I know it's God speaking to me and not just some other voice or influence. Yeah. So I mentioned getting laid off.
Yeah.
So that was on a Friday. This was April 2009. So I'm coming up on 16 years. But that following Monday, I'm freaking out because I have $486 in my bank account. Just because I loved making money and was pretty good at it did not mean I was good at saving it. That's a whole other conversation.
That is another skill set that pairs well with making money.
Ideally, under ideal circumstances, right? But I hit my knees on that Monday and I said, God, I'm freaking out here. And what God said back was, I have given you the freedom to trust me. And my first thought was, well, that's rich.
Yeah.
But that's how I knew it was God, because it was like only God speaks with that sort of twinkle in his eye.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far, and I'd love to continue it with you. If there's anything that you've heard that resonated with you, brought up questions, or just made you want to chat with someone, book a conversation with me. I will leave a link in the description box and a card on the screen so that you can book a free 20-minute conversation with me at a date and time that works for you. Thanks for being here. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Indeed. I would love to hear more about that. I would love to hear more about your faith journey, because I forget how I first encountered you. I want to say, did you ever do a workshop or something with Matt Ragland?
I know Matt Ragland.
Yes.
Consider him a friend. When he was at Podia, he invited me to be a part of a virtual summit they put on, and I talked about brand development.
Okay. That might have been something. That's how. Anyway, so it was a while ago, and so I would just tracked you over the years, purchased your course, Morning Marketing Habit, which is a great way to help people make marketing unscary and routine, which needs to happen. But over the years, just little things you said, I was like, I wonder if he's Christian, if he's faith-based or whatever. And you did mention that you are a Christian. I would love to, I'm always curious about faith journey, just anyone's faith journey, regardless of what tradition it's in. And you mentioned Parker Palmer, you mentioned spiritual formation in grad school. I haven't been able to continue as of yet, but I started some of the training with the Center for Courage and Renewal, which is Parker
Oh, cool.
Palmer. And actually the Touchstones that we read is an idea that I got from attending.
I love it.
Yeah, their training. So anyway, just what about your faith journey stands out for you?
The first thing that comes to mind is perfectly encapsulated in this story I'll tell you. Church camp, guest speaker, a guy named Willie. And Willie was this passionate African-American Church of Christ minister, preacher from Nashville, where I grew up. And I go up to Willie afterwards and I say, I just wish I had a story like yours, because he was in a gang and Jesus appeared to him and said, follow me. So he had this road to Damascus experience, and he woke up the next day and he did it.
Wow.
And Willie, and I'll never forget this, right? He said, you don't want a story like mine. He said, what I didn't go into was I lost all my friends because I found out they weren't real friends. And just because you stop selling drugs doesn't mean there aren't consequences. And just because he started following Jesus didn't make his life any easier. Then he said, tell me a little bit about you. And I just I grew up and my parents are still married and they love me. And they both grew up in Christian homes and their parents grew up in Christian homes. So I'm like fourth, or I don't even know how many generations, people of faith. And he said, don't you think your story is what I want? Whew, don't you think your story is what I want for my kids and their kids? And I think that just shifted my understanding of my own upbringing and life up to that point. I think we tend to be dismissive of the things that we have, and we tend to just pine for the things that we don't have. And my dad sells insurance. He is one of the more, if not the most reliable person I've ever met. He was just at every game, every rehearsal. He was at everything. And I said to him one time, if you hadn't sold insurance, what would you have done? He said, whatever would have allowed me to be home at 5:30 and be there for your mom and for you and your two sisters. It's hard for me to separate my faith journey from that experience of profound safety. And then I grew up with both sets of grandparents in Nashville. My mom has one sister, my dad has 4 siblings. They were all local. There is a whole sort of writhing mess of cousins. And that was my experience growing up. I was mostly shielded from family drama. There was some, but I grew up going to Churches of Christ, which came out of the Stone Campbell movement. It was part of the bigger restoration movement. And for people listening who are somewhat familiar with the last 200 years of church history, if you haven't heard of the Stone Campbell movement, I'm not surprised. It can be pretty insular and even sectarian.
Yeah.
That said, my parents had the same friends from when they were in college. Like, they were just like, I just had multiple sets of parents. And again, how do you sometimes separate faith from the people around you who espouse that faith? And I've heard a lot of stories of people who struggle to see God as father because of the father they had. Understandably, it's maybe a lot easier for them to see God as mother, right? I've talked to lots of folks who walk away from any type of faith because they see such hypocrisy in the churches, or it's always specific people, right? That's not to say that I did not struggle or experience dissonance, because I certainly did. I was always the black sheep, or felt that way, in part because I was an independent thinker. So I remember writing with my mom, and I'm not knocking my mom. This is just a story, not any kind of commentary. But I grew up in a family of teetotalers, right? So no one drank. I joked that it was none of the big 5, no drinking, smoking, cussing, gambling, dancing. None of the big 5. Naturally, those are, except for
I was
gambling.
not Church of Christ, but I grew up with the same big 5.
There you go, right? I found out that my Baptist friends, same deal, right? Especially Southern Baptists, right? Seventh-day Adventists. Church of Christers weren't alone, but we were driving down the road, and my mom said, you drinking's wrong. And I said, the Bible doesn't say that. And I was like 13 or 14. And she said, and I said, apparently I don't. What do you mean? And I really feel for my mom now that I have 3 kids of my own. I'm just like, tell that little insouciant jerk to just, anyway, that was me. At 15, I sat my parents down and formal sit down conversation. And I said, you are no longer my moral compass. And that conversation did not go well.
It did not go as you planned?
Did not go as I planned. But I always had one foot out the door of the Church of Christ, because so many of the things that define the Church of Christ, I did not see any evidence for that specific ecclesiology or way of doing church. I didn't see any evidence of that in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Or the evidence was so loose that I'm like, this is grasping at straws. And I was thinking that way in high school.
Yeah.
I started befriending kids dating girls who went to other types of churches. And I had a girlfriend who was Presbyterian. Gasp. All right. Had a girlfriend who was Methodist. And anyway, so I just went to other churches, and what I saw was like deep sincerity.
Yeah.
And what I saw were some things that were really intriguing to me, like liturgy. We called it an order of worship.
Yeah.
The thing about liturgy is it was just better written than the order of worship we had. And I was like, a poet wrote this.
Yeah.
And I'm a poet too.
Yeah.
And so this stuff over here, some guy who got voluntold to lead the closing prayer and just fumbled his words, poor guy. But meanwhile, my dad and my grandfather are voluntelling me, and so I'm leading closing prayers and leading singing. Church of Christ has only a cappella worship, and I had not a great voice, but a good enough voice and enough sort of social confidence that I would get up there and sing. But by the time I got to college, I still went to Churches of Christ, but it wasn't because I believed that the way Church of Christ was doing church or living out faith or doing discipleship was better. At that point, it was more just because there were people that I loved. And that is what I would emphasize, is no matter how much of the statement of faith of any church or any group of churches, no matter how much of that you believe, people stay at churches or they leave churches because of individual experiences with individual people. And you're going to get hurt regardless. I got hurt. We don't even have to go into that, because at the end of the day, it's not even all that interesting.
Yeah.
Even what's more interesting to me now is how many people loved me. They didn't love me for me. Some of them did. But some of them loved me because I was the child of my parents. Some of them loved me because, hey, it takes a village, right? And so much of my early experiences with the Christian faith, and therefore with any faith, were with imperfect people who were flawed. And some people, it was easy to see their flaws, and other people it wasn't. But they all had flaws. At the end of the day, though, what you remember is how they made you feel about yourself. And so I feel so fortunate that I can look back, and if we were like tallying things up on a scale, the side of we're balancing, and there's whatever it's called, like the cup that on this side that can hold positive experiences. I just had people who were willing to love me even when I was being a difficult teenager and was doomed to stay a Christian. I also found out, and then I'll shut up, I taught high school for 1 year between undergrad and grad.
Okay.
And I was going through this textbook, and there was just this footnote, and it talked about how St. Augustine, and one of the early evangelists in England, whose name was Augustine of Canterbury, there was this footnote that said, Austin is a contraction of Augustine. And I had never known that. Like, you have Will, William, or Bill, William, and then you have Austin and Augustine. And we were talking earlier about God laughing at you, and you're pretty sure you'll eventually marry a military chaplain, right? My first name means reverend or set apart, because that's what Augustine means. Like August Caesar, it's set apart, or most like Reverend Caesar. My middle name is my mom's maiden name, Legate, ambassador, emissary. My last name is Church. So my name is Special Ambassador Church, which is ridiculous.
Prophetic.
And my parents didn't even know this when they named me.
Yeah.
But it is prophetic. And so I'm like, God got his teeth in me.
Yeah.
And I can't get away.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to get away. But it is funny to me that what my ministry does look like now as opposed to what it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's probably better that I'm not in formal ministry with a name like Austin Church. It'd be very confusing for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked in theological higher ed. So I worked in seminary. I attended seminary. And I had a couple of people over the years ask me, oh, can so-and-so talk to you? I think that they would just really love working, and they love the church so much and blah, blah, blah. I said, then they should not work here.
Do you want to run them? How many people do you want to leave the faith?
Right.
That's as many people as you should hire to work in higher Christian ed.
Yeah. Because I think, have you heard the proverb, those who love the law and sausages should watch neither being made?
It's true.
Yeah. I speak from that, like, deep, profound, but I am still very much like, how can we help people do the work that God has called them to do? But I love what you pointed out about being loved when you were growing up, like growing up in that church. My parents, like the church that I grew up in as a child, we were there until I was about 17. My parents met and married in that church. They became Christians in that church. That's where they met the Lord. That's where they met. That's where they got married, where they had me. Part of the reason why we ended up leaving was over the years, just like you, independent thinker, and just always, why? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we doing it this way? Why are they saying that? Why do we have to live by this rule? And why? Every parent's nightmare, and you ask it too many times in a row. And my parents' experience of taking certain concerns to the church, as you pointed out so wonderfully, the individual experiences that they have with the individual people was what eventually all culminated in, this is not the place for us anymore. And I was 17 before I learned people don't just go around calling each other brother and sister. Brother Adams, Sister Robinson. That's not how most people address each other.
That's right.
And I grew up independent, fundamental Baptist. You think Southern Baptist are a little strange. We went even further. And that sense of safety, that sense of being, I walked into the church building and I was walking into my family. I was walking into the family room. I knew the people there. There was the routine of the people you greeted and you had conversations with and you caught up with. And when my family decided to leave that church, in a very real sense, we were excommunicated from that community. And that's a wound that I'm not sure has ever fully healed, because when you've known that kind of belonging and suddenly you're told you no longer belong, that does a number on you. But I've had enough people who've shown me who Jesus is, who have shown me who God is through Jesus, who have helped me keep company with Jesus, who've helped me pay attention to the movement of the Spirit. And I can't not be that. I can't not be there.
Yeah.
And
I haven't found a better way.
Same.
I have nowhere else to go.
Yeah. Who else do we go? You have the words.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really, I love that. You had mentioned growing up in family, multiple generations, extended family. I would love to just step back a bit. Let's get our sniffles under control here.
Sniffles, yeah, I'll just... That's a soundtrack, okay? That's a soundtrack.
That's our special effects for the day. Thanks.
That's right.
I would love to step back a little bit and hear what you think about the concept of role models. What comes up for you when you think about that? Because it sounds like you probably have some specific people in mind, but I would love to abstract out and think a little bit more about what you learn from that, what you take from that.
I have specific people, and the first person that comes to mind and how I would abstract that is just come along with me.
Yeah.
Come along with me.
Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss part 2 of this conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found something that resonated with you and that encourages you to become more hopeful, creative, and wise in your own life. Make sure to check out the links in the description below and subscribe if you enjoy this episode. Shalom.